It was another graveyard shift, 3 a.m., the kind of quiet that makes the old hospital creak and hum with its own strange life. I was doing my rounds, the familiar click of my shoes on the linoleum the only sound. Room 304 was Mrs. Gable's. She was an elderly woman in a persistent vegetative state, unresponsive. Yet, her eyes were always open, always seemed to be following me. I'd dismiss it, a trick of the light, fatigue. But it was unsettling. One night, as I adjusted her IV drip, I noticed something new. Her lips, dry and cracked, were barely moving. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper escaped them. I leaned closer, straining to hear. "He's coming for you." The words were chillingly clear. My heart pounded. I spun around, checking under the bed, behind the curtains. Nothing. The room was empty save for Mrs. Gable and me. I tried to rationalize it, a dream, a reflex, but the words echoed. The next morning, Mrs. Gable was gone. Her bed stripped, the room empty. I asked the day shift nurse, "Mrs. Gable? When did she transfer?" The nurse looked at me strangely. "Mrs. Gable? She was discharged yesterday morning before your shift. Her family took her home." My blood ran cold. I saw her last night. I heard her last night. I went back to room 304, now cold and impersonal. On the freshly made pillow, folded neatly, was a small, creased piece of paper. It wasn't there before. I picked it up. Written in shaky, unfamiliar script, a single sentence. "He's here." My new assignment was a home care case. An elderly woman named Eleanor, living in a secluded Victorian house nestled deep within the woods. The isolation was immediate, the silence absolute, broken only by the wind through the trees. Eleanor was frail, mostly deaf, and spent her days staring at the ornate wallpaper, whispering. I'd ask her who she was talking to. She'd just offer a weak smile. "The children. They're always here." I attributed it to her age, her solitude. One afternoon, while preparing her lunch, I distinctly heard light, childish giggles coming from the sitting room next door. Eleanor lived alone. I mentioned it to her. She just squeezed my hand, her eyes surprisingly lucid. "They like you, nurse. They always like the new ones." Days turned into weeks. The whispers from the walls grew clearer, sometimes sounding like my name, faintly from the shadows. I felt a constant sense of being watched, an unease I couldn't shake. One stormy evening, the power flickered. I found Eleanor in this darkened sitting room, staring intently at a faded portrait of a young girl on the mantelpiece. She looked at me, her face unreadable, then back at the portrait. Her voice, usually a fragile whisper, was surprisingly strong. "She wants to play, nurse. She's been waiting." A sudden sharp rap came from the window. I glanced over, saw nothing but the rain. I knew I had to leave. As I hurried out, the front door closing behind me, I could still hear it, the faint, playful giggles echoing from deep within the silent house, growing louder with each step I took down the winding gravel path. It was a particularly draining night in the ER. We had a code blue on a homeless man, John, brought in unresponsive. We worked on him for what felt like an eternity, the frantic rhythm of compressions and the blare of monitors filling the room. Miraculously, we brought him back. He was confused, disoriented, as expected from the trauma. But then he started pointing to an empty chair in his recovery room, his eyes wide with a fear that wasn't just post-resuscitation haze. "She's sitting right there," he rasped, "the nurse with the red hair." I was the only nurse with distinctly red hair on duty. I tried to reassure him, attributing his vivid perceptions to his fragile state. But he was insistent, begging me to make her leave. Later that night, during my rounds, I found him clutching his chest, his breathing shallow, his face a mask of terror. He was pointing again, his arm trembling, at the same empty chair. "She's here," he whispered, a guttural sound. "She wants her chair back. She's calling for Eleanor." He passed away shortly after, his last gaze fixed on that vacant seat. The next week, the ER was slammed again. Another code blue came in, a young woman, unresponsive after a car accident. As I helped wheel her into the ER bay, I noticed her hair. It was a vibrant, unmistakable shade of red, just like mine. My blood ran cold as I glanced at her chart. Her name, clearly printed in bold letters, was Eleanor. And as we moved her onto the gurney, I saw an empty chair, perfectly positioned next to where her head would rest. Working the night shift in pediatrics was usually a reprieve. The chaos of the day settled into a quiet hum, allowing me to catch up on charting and enjoy the rare moments of peace. One evening, little Lily, a quiet 5-year-old recovering from a minor surgery, woke up screaming. I rushed to her room. She was pointing frantically at her nightlight, a small, glowing bunny on her bedside table. "It moved! It moved by itself!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. I tried to calm her, attributing it to post-operative grogginess and an overactive imagination. I repositioned the light, reassuring her it was just a shadow. The next night, as I was walking past her room, I froze. Through the half-open door, I saw a shadowy, indistinct figure standing over Lily's crib. My heart pounded. I burst into the room, flipping on the main light. The figure was gone. Lily was awake, staring intently at her nightlight, which was now facing the wall, its gentle glow obscured. She whispered, her voice barely audible. "He moved it again. He wants to play." I checked the light. It was firmly plugged in, its base heavy. No one could have moved it without me hearing, without me seeing. The following morning, Lily was discharged, her family eager to take her home. As I was cleaning her room, preparing it for the next patient, I noticed something tucked under her pillow. It was a child's drawing, hastily scribbled with crayons. A stick figure, clearly Lily, holding hands with a tall, dark, shadowy figure, and written beneath it, in shaky, childish handwriting, almost like an instruction. "Good night, nurse. He's coming for your light." As I looked at the drawing, the bunny night light in the corner of the room suddenly flickered, then went completely dark.